Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Our next guest brings us decades of insight into the publishing world, along with the desire to see transformation through sharing your faith. He's a friend of many and an all-around good guy. Shaun Tabatt's first loves are his faith, family, books, coffee, and running. By day, he works for Nori Media Group as an acquisition and marketing publishing executive. He's the host of the popular podcast, The Shaun Tabatt Show on Destiny Image Podcast Network, the new daily devotional podcast, and has just launched a new marketing and platform development for Christian creatives on Facebook. He and his wife are the proud parents of 10 amazing children. Shaun can be regularly seen here as a featured guest the first Monday of each month in the 11 o'clock hour. You can find out more about him at shauntabatt.com. Joining us now for this edition of the Shaun Tabatt Show. So here we are on this week where, for the most part, people's eyes are glued to the election. And we, interestingly enough, are booked out until the middle of January.
Wow.
So it's been quite an extraordinary rush to get publishers to book far in advance. 2.5 months is a pretty long lead time. But I think they're expecting that something will shift. But they're getting their authors out there. What are you seeing from the publishing side of topics and coverage? And, everything's been about a call to prayer, a call to repentance. Everybody's got to be on their knees for this election. It's quite a response globally to what's happening here.
Yeah, I think in terms of the spirit-empowered and charismatic publishing space, there's been a lot of traffic around prophetic books speaking into the election, the state of our nation, and I think, like you just said, Eric, kind of that call to repentance, call to prayer, getting into our prayer closets and just going before the Lord and interceding for the nation. I've been seeing lots of books around that, lots of conversations and interviews around that. I think all of us are just sort of on pins and needles waiting to see how the election plays out. And, afterwards, when kind of the dust settles and we see who gets selected to be our next president, I think that will, to some degree, dictate what's going to be popular or what's going to rise to the top of those bestseller lists as we look to the rest of 2021 and into 2020 and into early 2021. I think regardless of who wins the election, the need and the push for more prayer and intercession for our nation, I think that's going to continue in a strong way regardless. As I've been talking to people where that's their sole, their primary ministry focus, the need has been great leading up to tomorrow. The need's going to be even bigger, I think, after the fact. So those sorts of books, that sorts of content, I think we're going to be seeing that for quite some time.
When you take a look at the content that was put out right up until now, many of the words spoken over the third Great Awakening. It's a real common phrase, something I'm hearing that people are really focusing on, and that the COVID shutdown caused a real lukewarm kind of response, that everybody just kind of subjected themselves to the government reaching into the church and determine what was essential and non-essential. And it was interesting that it was not a backlash. There was not a revolution, which I would have expected from an on-fire body to just say, whoa, you have overstepped your bounds. You have no right to determine that a liquor store or a casino or a bar or, for that matter, protest on the street can have no restrictions, but churches have to close. I don't think anything in our 240-year history has ever seen anything like this.
Yeah, it's definitely been a unique season, to say the least. We've had some high-profile churches like John MacArthur's church or Pastor Rob McCoy. We saw a lot of the pushback, especially out in California. I feel like the churches and leaders that have pushed back more strongly, they tend to be older generation, maybe baby boomers more so. I kind of sense like I'm a Gen Xer, so Gen Xer, millennial, younger leaders and pastors have tended to kind of go with the flow, not necessarily want to upset or kind of bring the wrath of their county or their state down on them. And I'm painting with a very broad brush kind of generalization. So not that there aren't pastors who have been pushing back, but and it's very, I interact with pastors all over the country. It's just a very different based on the state and the county that you and I have friends in Texas where they've, with the exception maybe being sort of limited for a few weeks, they've been wide open, the whole time through this whole COVID crisis season. Our church here in Urbana, we did outside services, and we've finally been open for, I think, 3-4 weeks now where, we do have some social distancing and masking when we're walking around the building. So there are some limitations there. But even here, with the zone we're in Illinois, starting today, there's some shift in terms of, they're closing restaurants down and other things again. So I'm still waiting to see how that plays out for the church. But I think we're in this real challenging period where we could see things go the other direction and stuff gets shut down more strongly again, as you're seeing news articles about the number of positive COVID tests on the rise. So yeah, I don't think we're by any means out of the woods yet with all of that.
When you take a look at I think the publishing industry is sometimes reflective of trends. In other ways, they're just kind of in their groove, put out parenting books, put out mentoring books, this is what they do. Devotionals. I've never seen so many devotionals in a 12-month period as I've seen this year. And then I'm reading of people signing for 2 more devotionals and 3 more devotionals and 5 more devotionals, and I'm not a devotionals person, so I'm not really sure I really get the big push for devotionals, but apparently they must sell, or publishers wouldn't be putting them out. But the Spirit-filled marketplace is talking about this shift that has to take place. And, the conversation really becomes, God is sovereign. It's going to play out the way He wants to play it out. Does He not hear our petitions? He does. Did He not hear Hezekiah's petition for 15 more years? He did. So we know that Moses appealed to the heart of God, and God responded. Hezekiah appealed to the heart of God, and God responded. But in this season, as we're watching the Middle East restructure, is that in some eyes are saying that's the setup for the Ezekiel 38 portion that says that Israel would live at peace with their neighbors? Is this the unfolding of a movement towards this globalist agenda, this one world agenda that will usher in the Antichrist? The Bible says it will happen, and this is what it will look like. There will be lawlessness, there will be lovers of self, there will be a form of godliness that's not godly, there'll be a gospel preached that's not the gospel, and we're bearing witness to that. Here in the West, we're bearing witness to it all over the place. How do we write to that and explain to people through books, through podcasts, that the answer to this is all is well with my soul. It doesn't really matter what happens in the temporal, it matters what happens in the eternal. And that's a hard message when people are scraping together for an income, or their business is shut down, or their church is going out of business because they can't pay the bills. How do you balance all that?
Well, I can't promise that I'll have all the answers for you, Eric, but I'll do my best. I had a conversation with R.T. Kendall last week, and he had an interesting perspective where he said he feels like we here in America are under a compassionate judgment of God. And I know some people, depending on the camp you're from, they might not be comfortable with that language, but in terms of, things are so out of control right now here in the United States that we're in a season where we're undergoing judgment, but there's a window to turn back to God, and God is calling us, like we already talked about, to our prayer closets, into repentance and intercession and that sort of a thing. And so I've found that to be partly a helpful way to frame the season that we're in. On the one hand, we look at global politics and what's unfolding all across the world, and we can kind of draw dotted lines into different prophecies and go, it seems like we're entering into this season or that season. And then there's also a lot of our other prophetic friends who are talking about kind of a great harvest that's coming of souls, that we're stepping into this new era, this new season where, kind of some people call it like a third Reformation. And so I feel like depending on which kind of camp people are in, or sort of the prophetic lens they look through, you're going to get varying answers for what they see happening or what they see God doing. I think to some degree we could go, well, it's kind of all of it at the same time, and they're maybe pulling on different parts or seeing different parts of what God is doing as he's at work across the globe. I think more than anything, in terms of whether we're talking about, what we're communicating through books or podcasts or video or other type of media, is to be really pressing into what God is calling, whether we're talking about you and me as content creators or authors writing books or publishing houses that serve specific markets, to be about the places that God has you called to serve and to disseminate and share information in. And so, like, for instance, Destiny Image, we serve very much the charismatic and the spirit-empowered space. So we're creating resources that speak to that audience, that reach that audience, that use language that audience would connect with. Very different than what I was doing on the Bethany House side when I worked for Baker Publishing Group back in the day. So, I think in the same way that, there's a bunch of different expressions about what God's doing, that looks like different things in different markets, and people are just kind of pulling on different aspects of what they see God doing through their specific lens.
Do you think that the consumer side of books, ebooks, whether audiobooks, printed books, is a reflection of what people are leaning towards or hungry towards? And when we take a look at the bestsellers, is that a reflection of the heart of the people, of what they're hungry for?
I think when we talk about bestsellers, there's maybe a difference between front list and back list. So in terms of a lot of what's on the bestseller lists is still, back when I worked Christian retail in the 90s, we see some books that are just perennial sellers. I always say they're all the $5 and $10 specials, and they're the go-to book on that topic. So you're always going to have a situation where probably 25% or 50% of your bestseller list kind of market space is older books that just have stood the test of time, and they're the go-to books on that topic. But in terms of front list, what's been interesting, I think, especially over the summer, obviously sales have been very highly driven through Amazon at this stage, just as so many bookstores and bricks and mortar locations shut down or closed permanently at this point. Things that we would expect, books that have been speaking to racial tension and racism. How do we deal with that? That's been huge in both the Christian and the mainstream market. Books on marriage, especially. I mean, we've heard about, whether it's in our Christian circles or people that aren't necessarily people of faith. Divorce has been running rampant throughout the COVID crisis. If people have been stuck at home, so marriage and family books have been on the rise throughout the summer. So I think to some degree, in terms of book sales, you have a good chunk of what's happening in the market that does reflect what people are struggling with, what they're dealing with. Books looking at the end times have been very popular in this season. Books looking at prophetic words around the election, that's been very popular in this season. So I think it'd be fair to say, in terms of sales and trends, a lot of times the stuff that does rise to the top, it is very reflective of what is happening in terms of culture, worries, concerns, issues that people are facing. So, on the one hand, you're always going to have the tried and true that dominate the bestseller list, but the other stuff that rises to the top tends to be reflective of what people are struggling with. But generally speaking, in the market, you're always going to have devotionals, prayer books, marriage books, parenting books. You're always going to have a few of those that are coming out, partly because there's eventually something kind of gets phased out because the language doesn't work anymore, or the up and coming generation doesn't know who that person is. So you'll always have kind of that ongoing litany of those tried and true topics. You just need a new voice to speak to that new generation.
It's much harder today to get the name out because I sold tens of thousands of books at personal appearances. My Amazon numbers would be nothing, but if you take what I sold at the table, 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 books from personal appearances, it's a good number.
Yeah, definitely.
But the book scan numbers don't support that. So in this season where I've been basically taken out of my element for 8 months, I normally do 3 live appearances a week, completely taken out of that element. I know that that's had to have hurt a lot of people like myself, that this is how people get to know you. They hear you speak, right. They say, well, I like the tone of that. Then they come out to the book table, you spend a couple hours with them signing books, and they sell. So in place of that, podcasting, programs on-demand TV like ours has grown, but also audiobooks have risen this year especially to over 1/3 of the purchases of books are now audiobooks. People are listening to books more. What do you make of that trend?
I think partly this year you've seen ebooks and audiobooks both rise. Ebooks I feel like had stagnated for a while, but just that people have been stuck at home and reading more. We have seen ebooks rise. I feel like in the audiobook space, there's almost a 1-to-1 correlation with podcast listenership in terms of the popularity of podcasting. Very much connected with the popularity of audiobooks. And so as we've seen podcasting rise, where people are used to hearing from their favorite authors and leaders on popular podcasts, they'll also go and want to consume content from those same people in audiobook as well. It's been interesting to see what I wondered what would happen with audiobooks, because for me, in terms of podcasts and audiobooks, I'm listening when I'm out running. Back in the day when I had to commute into an office, I would listen during my commute, which back in Minnesota in the winter could be like 3-4 hours a day if it was bad weather. And so I was kind of curious, as people's patterns were disrupted of not commuting and not going to the gym. I wondered if audiobook listenership would go down. Yet I was kind of proven wrong, though, because audiobooks have definitely been on the rise. So I think part of it is the connection with podcasts. I think people like the ease of delivery of ebook and audiobook, especially when you can't go to a physical store easily to pick something up, or if you don't want to wait 2 days, you get that instant gratification. And so I think some of that has just contributed, given the current social circumstances that we find ourselves in. And audiobooks I feel like they've gotten better. More publishers are doing audiobooks for pretty much everything. I mean, not too many years ago, publishers weren't doing every single book in audio. It was kind of, certain ones, and now pretty much everything is in audio. And so, it's just a shift in how people are consuming media. I mean, our perspective at Nori Media Group is we want to partner with the authors that we work with to the extent of getting their messages out there in as many formats as possible. So whether it's print, ebook, audio, large print, e-courses, content that goes out on YouTube and our podcast network in different places, being bought into the man or woman and their message in a way that it's about getting the word out, and we're not as worried about the format. And so it's just a shift in thinking, am I a publisher or am I a media company? Those are kind of two different journeys, but really making the content available in whatever way somebody wants to consume, prefers to consume. And in terms of teaching materials, how do they learn best? Not everybody learns well through reading. Some people prefer video, some people prefer listening. So trying to craft product offerings that meet the needs of the broadest consumer market possible.
We're talking with Shaun, with Shaun Tabatt, host of the Shaun Tabatt Show and host of the Shaun Tabatt Show here on Revealing the Truth on the first Monday of every month in the 11 o'clock hour. He's an avid podcaster. You can find the Shaun Tabatt Show on the Destiny Image Podcast Network. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some more models of publishing, what some of the trends are, and for you that's had a book in your mind and your heart, something you thought you wanted to write, what are some of the options available to you? I've been in conversations every day with publishers and agents and publicists, hearing a whole lot of new ideas, new thoughts, and new approaches, and we're going to talk about that when we return from this break. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Shaun Tabatt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on the first Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour, we host the Shaun Tabatt Show with our good friend Shaun Tabatt, author and host of the popular podcast, the Shaun Tabatt Show on Destiny Image Podcast Network. Shaun, welcome back.
Always good to be with you, my friend.
Shaun, I'm in this project that I'm currently working on, which is a very unique work. It's called Confused by Christianity, Confessions of a Jewish Believer. There's words in Christianity that still confuse me today, 25 years later. Simple words like the person of the Holy Spirit. Person means, to me, in the vernacular of English, a person, a
Right.
fellow human being. And yet we refer to, in many denominations, as the three in one and the person of God. And so as if God's a person, this old guy, this old wise guy with his long beard, and it's one of the things that is a little confusing to me, that we've incorporated it and we've made it so we don't stop to think, wait a second, is God really a person like me? Or a different kind of person? Is the Holy Spirit a person? We know Jesus was a person, but only for a very short period of time. Was he a person? He wasn't a person always. So one of the little things that I'm confessing in this 25-year journey of faith, of words that trip me up, words that still confuse me. And I talk to Mike Heiser every month, and certainly wise and very brilliant, and conversations we've had. And so he says, yeah, I want you to go for it. I mean, put all this stuff out there, because the average person in the pew can't answer the questions that I have. And it's not based on theology. It's based on the person in the pew. It's based on, what do Christians really know? How can they really explain? If I were to just walk into your church in Urbana and sit down next to somebody and say, okay, hey, you believe in that God in three persons thing? And I go, yeah. Okay. So tell me how the Holy Spirit's a person. Like, did you meet him? Did you have coffee with him? Did you, what'd you guy do? What's he look like? And they would go, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, explain to me the person. And they would get confused, because they don't have clarity, because the clarity may be gotten in seminary or to the Greek scholars in the application of the word. But if I look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary under person, okay, it's usually in a human being. Yeah. So I'm going down this confessions of things about Christianity that confuse me, that Christians are confused by, but they don't voice it because they don't even know they're confused by it until they're asked about it. And so right. in these conversations that I've had, and the gentleman that I'm working with on this has said, here, listen, I want you to talk to a bunch of different people that over my long, very stellar course of publishing 50 books and being one of the greatest researchers ever known in the Christian world, I want you to talk to these people about this project. And I'm getting a really interesting dialogue between publishers and publicists and agents. And it used to be like, what's your platform? And we have an exhaustive platform. I mean, if there's a platform, we're on it. To how big's your mailing list? That was the new one that got thrown at me last week. How big's your mailing list? And I was like,
yep.
Are we going back to email as being? Well, we're going back to email. Then there's this new text to connect, instantaneous text to connect to your base. And I'm seeing a whole new genre of what we would call platform, which back when you and I started in the publishing world, and I started publishing years ago, platform was followers, and how many Facebook followers did you have, and how many YouTube followers, and the whole thing's changed, and the way you publish a book has changed, and you have more options, but the options there's more, but they're also different. They're kind of weird a little bit okay, so there's self-publishing, but it's not really self-publishing, it's hybrid publishing. What are you seeing because I think people are looking for new ways to engage more people, to get more content out there, but that also opens up the door to more confusion because you don't have vetted people who have it's just my opinion by Bob. My opinion by Bob. My opinion by Bob. What's the name of your book? My opinion by Bob. So what are you seeing out there? Because you're in the publishing business, but you're also forecasting what it's going to look like a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. You have to have that crystal ball to say, where are we headed? What's it looking like?
Well, I think to speak to the platform aspect of what you just shared, platform continues to be important, whether you're working in a traditional publishing situation with a trade publisher versus whether you're also going to self-publish. Having some semblance of a platform is going to be important, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter followers, whether that's having like you and I do, Eric, podcasts and video-based shows where you've got people subscribing there. Email list, I think, is becoming increasingly important in the sense that I feel like people thought, email, that was so 10 or 15 years ago, but the importance of email has definitely come back in a big way, and I see a lot of people investing time there. And so platform continues to be important. If you want to get a publishing deal, the publisher is going to ask you about that, certainly. If you want to just effectively spread the message, get the word out about your new book, having all of that in line or lined up for your self-publishing book is going to be important. Probably one of the interesting things I've noted this past year is, I'm seeing some authors who maybe they did 75% of their work self-published. I'm seeing some of them come back and partner with publishers on certain key messages where some of the things that a publisher might bring to bear in terms of editorial help, interior design, cover design, marketing and sales support, if it's a really key or important message, maybe they're coming up with some kind of a hybrid contract where that author might be maintaining more of their rights or some other things, but they want access to some of those in behind the scenes things that they don't just have the team to do that. So I am seeing some differences there. In terms of self-publishing, the bar to entry is still very low, so that space continues to grow like crazy. I am seeing more of the people self-publishing starting to hire out some of the traditional services that they need more and more, where they are hiring a professional editor, they're hiring a professional cover designer, they're hiring outside PR services. So, I have friends who do outsource kind of work in those spaces, and I keep hearing about them connecting with more and more of these self-published authors or people who are just starting out. And, like I always say, though, Eric, in terms of whether traditional or self is the right route for you, it varies by the goal of what you need that book to do for you as the author, the person creating it. If you want something turned around very quickly, or maybe it's a prophetic message that's very timely, there are a handful of publishers that could help you get a message out, within 3 months or 6 months. However, the majority of the traditional publishers, they're going to tell you, well, gosh, 12 months, 18 months, because they're operating totally on a traditional publishing cycle. So something that's very timely, self-publishing could certainly help you get that out there faster. It's for me, like I'm working on my first book project right now. I'm working on a message focused around overcoming the spirit of abandonment is what I'm working on right now. And while I could certainly go the self-publishing route, I'm going to partner with Destiny Image, the publisher that I work for, because I want access to all the resources that we have behind the scenes to help get that word out as far and wide as possible. So at the end of the day, I think the amount of time that you want something to get out, that certainly is going to be part of it. But also, too, it would depend on the resources you have. Like if you're like John Bevere would be an example of an author that does self-publishing very successfully, but he has a large international ministry and teams and, finances to invest in all the things to make those books a success. He's got a platform to help support that. That might be an extreme example of where we all would long to get to, but I could paint pictures of self-publishing that's just over the top, even more successful than a lot of traditionally published books. I could go to the other extreme and tell you about self-publishing that was just it was kind of an epic fail because their mom and their grandmother bought the book and nobody else. So, a lot of it depends on the resources and the connections that you have in place to make those things successful.
This was my first encounter where I was given the advice to talk to agents. There's multiple aspects to this project, and there's also what everybody would consider to be my magnum opus, which is turning my biblical thriller into a movie. And in order to do that, you need an agent. So in these cross conversations about this project and with the person that is kind of mentoring me into the world of how do you disseminate volumes of information with tremendous credibility, and he's writing the forward to it because he was somebody that I know, I trust, he's a friend, and he is interested because it's kind of like the living research, and he's a researcher. I'm like the living research of 25 years as a Jewish believer on the inside, but looking in from outside, and there's things that confuse me. And it's kind of like the consolidated, I'm the 10,000 Jewish people who have come to faith being interviewed, being researched at one time. Because I know many others that feel exactly the same way, that have the question into the theology and to some of the doctrine and to some of the nuances of various aspects of Christianity. They're kind of confusing to the Hebrew mind. They just don't fit with the narrative. So, they're questions. They're not saying right or wrong. They're just putting them out there as, this confuses me. I can't seem to find a uniform explanation, one that everybody I talk to agrees with. It's the same. So it's been interesting. But I've been talking to agents, and that's a whole world I had never talked to before.
Sure.
What's your experience been with agents?
It's kind of funny that you mentioned agents. I have a good friend I'm helping navigate some publishing contract stuff right now, and he's in a competitive situation. And I remember earlier on in the conversation, he's a guy who has relationships at several publishing companies, and so he was navigating the waters on his own because he knows acquisitions agents and editors that work at these different publishing houses. And so as he's gotten to the finish line, though, he's in a situation where it's competitive between several publishing houses. And it was funny, we were trading some texts over the weekend. He's like, this is that situation you described to me where having an agent would have been really helpful to navigate the back and forth, because it gets weird when you're the author caught in the middle of all that. But by and large, in terms of agents, some publishers, like large publishing houses, some will only accept books that come through agented authors, so solicited manuscripts through an agent. Others will still take unsolicited manuscripts that come directly from an author. I have found through the years, though, that if you know somebody who works in acquisitions at a publishing house, you can kind of get in through the side door if you have some relationships. But if I had to speak real broadly about agents, they are going to ask a lot of those same questions that a publisher is going to want to talk to you about in terms of platform and is this a scalable, viable book topic, because they're looking for projects that they can realistically sell to a publisher and partner with you on. But where I find agents to be helpful is if you don't have strong relationships with all these people behind the scenes, they can help open those doors because they, to some degree, have already vetted you. That's why they're working with you, because they think you are worth representing. I think in terms of if you have something that you really want to get in front of like the top 5 publishing houses for consideration, that's where an agent can come in really helpful, because they are working with those publishing houses on a monthly basis. They're always pitching new ideas to those editors and agents behind the scenes. And also in terms of, if it's a project where there's a negotiation for, a large advance, or there's just a lot of back and forth and a lot of nuance in the negotiation. Having somebody who can be sort of the impartial third party, that can be really helpful. Because for you as the author, the book, the idea, or even like in the you're talking about, like even like a film, it's your baby, and so it is emotional. It's very personal. And if you have relationships with these people, the different publishers, it can put you as the author in just an awkward position where you're having to like go back between different friends. So sometimes having that agent can be a real big win to pull you out of those negotiations. Part of that too, the agent does need to get paid. I don't know what the average is, but I think it's maybe around the agent might take 10 to 15% of the advance, kind of a thing. So there is a financial cost, once a contract gets signed, as far as that works out. But whether or not an agent makes sense, it really depends on your specific circumstance. But you will still need to have some of those foundational platform pieces in place for an agent to take you seriously, because they're not just looking for random authors off this. They don't need more people to represent. They want the best people that they can represent. So you would need to have some of those things in place. Every once in a while, you'll have an idea where, regardless of the platform, even the author name, it totally wins on concept and it's just brilliant. But that's like 1 in 1,000, 1 in 2,000. I mean, as we've talked about, between traditional and self-publishing, the market is so saturated. Those things that just win based on concept, those are rare gems. And so maybe if you have one of those, maybe an agent will pick you up. But you do have to have some of that groundwork and foundation in place for them to give you a serious look.
A couple of the agents I talked to actually have a model where they'll publish the book in-house.
Sure.
Until you reach a certain level of sales. And once you've reached that level of sales, they'll then take it to a publisher saying, we've hit that 20,000 book milestone. It's got a lot more play to it, but we've taken it where we're going to take it. Now we're ready to present it to you because it's a proven entity. That's kind of a hybrid model where they have an investment in the publishing aspect of it. So they're going to develop the project. They're going to get what the quote-unquote self-publishing companies would get. You retain the rights. Your cost is the cost of printing, which puts you in the $1.50 range as opposed to the 60 off range. And then if you're somebody like myself that sells lots of books in person, you meet me, you hear me, you buy the book. That's a great model, because if you're selling the book for $15, you paid $1.50, you're putting $13.50 in your pocket, you sell 10,000 books, it's $135,000. Your chances of making that in the open market are, you see what royalty checks go out, they don't go out for $135,000. So it's kind of interesting if you front load some of those deals. They're expensive, but you get a much better product with all of the savvy of the agency. But as a starting point, unless you have a pocket full of money, some of those things, and you're willing to really invest in yourself. I always go back to the book and I hate that it's that book, but it is the classic story. It's The Shack.
Sure. Yep.
The classic story of The Shack is he printed them at home and he sold them out of the trunk of his car. And he printed them at home and sold them out of the trunk of his car. And he printed them at home and sold them out of the trunk of his car before he ever got a self-publishing contract where he paid somebody to print them. And then, of course, now it's sold, I don't know how many hundreds of...
It's still a bestseller pretty much every month, even today. Yeah.
And it started out being sold out of the trunk of a car. That's the classic story. You could have the next Shack.
Sure.
Not from a content standpoint, but from a process standpoint.
Well, and Eric, I'll comment just briefly on the hybrid model you described. It's intriguing to me in terms of if you work with an agency that basically assists you in publishing that initial draft of the book out of the gate, and like you said, they reach a certain sales threshold, and then they market it to others. That would be an interesting scenario to get pitched in terms of if something has a lot more runway to it. I think one of the challenges I could see there is if the author has fully saturated the market that exists for them, like in terms of where they speak, that could be interesting. You definitely have to have a pitch where you could say, hey, we've taken the X, but there's Y and Z out there still to be fulfilled. I think where that could be interesting beyond that initial book would be to prove to a publisher, hey, we've worked with this author. Their first book, we moved 25,000 units out of the gate in the first 6 months or 12 months. Regardless of whether I, as the publisher, would want to pick up that first book, if you show me that you've moved 25,000 units, I'm going to take that author very seriously. So, I think there is that potential for that first book to be picked up. But I think where that could be a great proof of concept is for that second or third book that author wants to work on, because you've proven that they have the ability to impact sales in a meaningful way. I am seeing I think that model is probably more popular out in the mainstream publishing space. I know of a handful of agencies in the Christian space where they're doing that quite successfully, but it's probably in the Christian space it's far more the exception than the rule, versus mainstream publishing when we're talking business, personal development, those broader markets. I feel like that's been more of a mainstay for quite a bit longer.
What's interesting is in this model is helping you to round it out by getting you plugged into the speaking circuit and helping you build. There's a barrier to entry into some of the conferences, and if you're you're a well-known but unknown, their goal is to make you a well-known known, and
right.
Their entree into that, which then expands and says, okay, your platform was here. Now we've worked with you. We've gotten the 25,000 sold, but we've now gotten you as one of the keynotes at this conference, and this conference, and now you're plugged into this community, and now there's a much broader spectrum. So it's part of also platform building that goes along with that, which is interesting. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and we could talk about this because I think we have an audience, you and I both, that's very interested in getting messages out and don't know how to do it. And there's a lot of courses you can take, and there's a lot of online programs. There's a lot of conferences and writers' conferences you can go to. But we're kind of the mini version of that, where in an hour's time we give you tidbits and pointers and say, hey, you should go to a writers' conference. You should go to some of these other things. But while you're locked down, watch Shaun and Eric, and we'll tell you some of the things we've experienced on both sides of this equation, both in the broadcast side and in the publishing side, and bring some insight into that. As always, I appreciate your candor and your knowledge and your willingness to be transparent and share. Always a joy to see you, and we look forward to seeing you right back here on the 1st of next month for the Shaun Tabatt Hour. You can find Shaun at shauntabatt.com. Bless you and your zip code of Tabatts.
Yes, thank you, Eric. It's always a joy to speak with you, my friend. I look forward to the first Monday of every month so you and I can hang out and talk publishing. It's always fun.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. Thank you, Shaun.